I never asked you. What I mean is I can't stand no long conversation with my tooth hurting this way. I got all nervous. It's terrible to be in a wagon when you get mad. You can't make it go no faster or anything. You just have to poke along when you feel like whipping and spurring. Well, I don't intend to do no farming, I said. Your tooth can stand that much. You're crazy anyway. We ought to be buying cattle. Knock hell out of that mule, he said. Keep him out of the ditch. He don't need to graze all the time. I figure it's going to get dry, he said. We've got some dry years coming. We might need this grass next summer more than we need it now. So I ain't going to stock very heavy. It won't hurt you to try a little farming. I began to get the panhandle on my mind when he said that. It would take something drastic to bring Dad to his senses about me. Maybe if I run off for a little while, it would do it. We got to Thalia and got the wheat seed, and while I was loading it and fooling around the feed store trying to bargain with the feller for half a load of cottonseed hulls, Dad went up and got the doctor to pull his tooth for him. It must have had roots plumb down to the collarbone because Dad spit blood all the way home. That was $3 throwed away, he said. Next time one wears out, you can pull it. Okay, I said. I'll do it for $2.50 and save you the trip besides. I wish it would quit coming these damn cold northers, he said. My blood's getting thin. We didn't say much going home till we got to the place where the road went over Idiot Ridge. When we got there, we could see the Taylor place across the long flat on the other hill, and off to the west of us we could see the Peters' barn. Which one of them damn girls do you reckon you'll marry? Dad said. We may as well thrash that out while we're thrashing. He beat all. Why, I may not marry at all, I said. I can't see that it's too much of your business anyway. Oh, I guess it is. I was just curious as to which kind of trouble you mean to get yourself into. Well, if I marry either one, it will damn sure be Molly, I said. You couldn't get me to marry Mabel with a 30-30. That's so, he said, spitting. He said not to, but I think I'll chew a little tobacco. I'm bleeding to death through the head. So the rest of the way, he spit blood and tobacco juice instead of just blood. Okay, he said, Mabel ain't the kind of girl you want. She's just the kind of girl that wants you. Molly, she don't want you. She damn sure does, I said. It made me mad. What makes you think you know so much about her? Me and her get along real well. Oh, of course, he said. I never meant to say you didn't. But you ain't going to catch her, and your buddy Johnny ain't either. That's plain as day. And it's a damn good thing. She'd run you ragged if you did. How'd we get to talking about this anyway, I said. I may not even marry, but if I do, it'll be Molly. Don't make no bets, he said, and don't be sorry if you don't. If you stay loose from her, she'll make you the best kind of friend you can have. If you do marry her, you'll have 99 kinds of misery. And you remember I told you that. A woman is a wonderful thing, God damn them. But a man oughtn't to marry one unless he just absolutely has to have some kids. There's no other excuse. Well, you married, didn't you? You survived it, didn't you? Yes, he said, but your mother didn't, and I'm surprised I did. It like to done for us both. Anyhow, you're wrong about Molly, I said. I can tell you that. He kind of grinned at me. You might tell me the time of day, he said, if you had a better watch than mine. That's about all you can tell me. Of course, if you marry the Peters girl, that'd be hell, too, but at least you won't lost no friend. I swear I can't talk to you, I said. You don't no more know me than the man in the moon. You think you know everything about me, and you don't really know a damn thing. You're probably right, he said. Maybe I'll improve. He got tickled at something and sat there popping the reins on the mules and laughing to himself for the next mile or two. Did you mean you think I ought to marry Mabel instead of Molly? I said. I'm just curious. Oh, no, he said. I told you already I didn't want you to marry till you were 40 or 50 years old. By then you might have enough judgment to marry right. Only I can see already you ain't going to have enough judgment to last that long. I just mentioned it to see how much you knew about yourself. I'm sure you know more about me than I do, I said. Dad sighed. People are the hardest animals in the world to raise, he said, and it's because nobody ever got them to breeding right in the first place. You don't breed people, I said. No, and it's a damn pity, he said. I can take me a bull and get him with just the right cows at just the right time, and I won't have to worry much about the calf crop. But the chances of anybody getting the right man anywhere near the right woman are as slim as chances get. That's why I don't mind so bad being old. If I was young again, I'd probably mess up even worse than I did." Dad said that in a pretty sad way. It bothered me to hear him. "That's a pessimistic damn thing to say," I said. "Why, I think life's a damn sight more fun than that." "You ain't lived one," he said. Then he told me how much work we were going to get done that winter. Chapter 10. Dad kept me so busy with one thing and another that it was after the 1st of December before I got over to Molly's to ask her to go to the Christmas dance with me. One afternoon I got off early, though. Dad decided it was going to come a storm, and he wanted to leave the cattle alone till it was over. Johnny never come to work that day anyway. His old man had kept him home to help him kill their hogs. Dad said he didn't need me, so I saddled up and got my sheepskin coat and rode over to the tailor's. It was cloudy and cold and looked sleety back in the northwest. I seen a big flock of geese going over. I hated the winter time. It sure made the cow work mean. Molly was hanging out clothes when I rode up. She had on an old red flannel shirt and a pair of overalls and was actually barefooted out in that cold. I guess it was a habit. The Taylor kids hardly ever put on shoes before Christmas, and they had them off again by Washington's birthday. She looked as pretty as ever. When I walked up, she put her hand on the back of my neck, and it was cold from the wet clothes. "Don't you hope it snows?" she said. I kissed her right quick and made her let me help her hang up clothes. It was so cold they practically froze while we were getting them over the clothesline. There were scraps of burned tow sack floating around the yard, so I figured the old man had let the windmill freeze, and Molly had had to thaw out the pipes. Molly's cheeks were red and her hair all blowy, but she didn't seem to mind the weather. "Dad said he might kill a goose," she said. "If he does, maybe you can come over and eat some of it." "Maybe I'll kill one myself," I said. "Let's go inside for a while." I got the bushel basket the clothes had been in, and she caught me by the hand and led me in the house. The kitchen was nice. It was so warm the windows were fogged over. Molly had made some cookies that morning, and we sat down at the kitchen table and ate them. "It's about time you came," she said. "I've been missing you so much." She reached her foot under the table and kicked me with her toes. "Dad's been working the daylights out of me. By the time I get loose from him, I ain't fit company for a pretty young lady." "I guess I could stand you," she said. "Ain't these good cookies? I feel so good today now that you showed up." I pulled my chair around by hers so we could sit close together. I decided I would start taking more afternoons off. "Johnny comes by a lot," she said. "He said you all had a pretty big time in Fort Worth. I wouldn't mind seeing Fort Worth sometimes." "Maybe we'll go there on our honeymoon," I said. She looked at me, half grinning and half serious. Part of what was in her eyes was mischief, and part of it wasn't. She had my hand in both of hers. "I told you about that once," she said. "I don't intend to get married till I'm going to have a baby." "Oh, now hush," I said. "That's silly. We'll get married by next summer. I don't care what you say." She shook her head and thought about it to herself for a while and wouldn't look at me. "Anyway, don't go getting no black eyes week after next," I said. "We don't want to miss another big dance." "I'm sorry about that, Gid," she said. "I knew that was why you come over. I already told somebody else I'd go with them." Well, that knocked a hole in my spirits. But when I thought about it a minute, it didn't surprise me. Johnny rode within 2 miles of her place every day. It was no wonder he'd asked her. "Well, I guess he deserves to take you to one dance," I said. "Anyway, I'll get to dance with you a lot. Johnny won't care about that." "Oh, it wasn't Johnny," she said. "He asked me a long time ago. I promised Eddie I wouldn't go to dances with anybody but him anymore." I didn't have no idea what to say to that. I couldn't believe it. "Are you plumb crazy?" I said. I started to bawl her out, but I seen she was sitting there about ready to cry. I held up. "Well, has he asked you to this dance?" I said. "I haven't seen him lately. He may not be in this part of the country." "No." She didn't let herself cry, but her eyes spilled over once. "I guess he's in Oklahoma," she said. "He ain't been here in a month, but I promised him anyway." "But, sweetheart," I said, "he may not even be back in time for the dance. You don't want to miss it, do you?" "No," she said. "You know I don't. But he told me not to go unless he was here to take me, so I better not." "That beats anything in the damn world," I said. "I ought to spank you right here. What kind of a feller is he? That ain't no way to treat a girl." But I hugged her anyway, and her face was all wet against my neck. "He's not any count," I said. "You know that, Molly." "Sometimes I wish I hadn't promised him," she said, "but I did. You're my favorite." We sat in the kitchen for a long time, kissing and not talking much. She wouldn't say another word about Eddie or the dance. I didn't care. It was a comfortable time, and I didn't think much about the dance. "Stay for supper with me," she said. "We butchered the milk pen calf so we can have beef. Dad may not be coming home today, I don't know." So I decided to stay, and I meant to make it all night if she'd let me. I milked and done her chores for her and chopped enough wood to last her through the cold spell. I even put my horse in the barn. Then we ate and got real cheerful. We found some popcorn and went in the living room to pop it in the fireplace. The living room was neat, so I knew the old man hadn't been there for a while. When he was around, it was always full of junk and whiskey jugs. "Wouldn't you like to get away from here?" I said. We were sitting on the floor close to the fire. Molly had unbuttoned her shirt a little, and I was watching the firelight on her throat and chest. "Why, no," she said. "I couldn't leave here. This is where I intend to live. Anyhow, who'd look after Dad?" We salted the popcorn and buttered it and ate it, and when Molly kissed me after that, she tasted like warm butter and salt. I'll always remember that. "I sure do like you," she said. "You can come stay with me any time you want to. You know that, don't you? It doesn't make any difference about the dances." She lay down with her head in my lap, and I looked down at her. "Why, I sure do like you, too. But it makes a difference to me. You're the one I want, and I don't want no other fellas around you." She grinned and sat up and gave me one of those butter and salt kisses. The firelight lit up our faces, and just that minute we heard the back door kick in and the old man stomped into the kitchen. We heard him stamping around trying to get his overshoes off. It made us both so sad at first we didn't even move. Then we sat up, and by the time he came into the room we were eating popcorn just as innocent as you please. "We're in here," she said. "It's Gid and me." "Oh, it is it?" he said. He turned and went back to the kitchen, and we heard him getting a glass out of the cabinet. When he come back, he had a glass of whiskey in one hand and his bottle in the other. It was the first time I ever saw him drink out of a glass. He still had on his big sheepskin coat and his old, dirty plaid cap, with the ear flaps still pulled down over his ears and tied under his chin. He didn't look in too good a mood. It kind of scared me, actually. I kept on eating popcorn. "Go get some firewood," he said. "It's a goddamn cold night." I didn't know whether he was talking to me or Molly, but I got up and went to the wood pile and got an armful of wood. "Put it over there," he said. So I dumped it right by his chair, and he took his gloves off and picked out a chunk and leaned over and pitched it in the fire. Sparks and ashes flew everywhere, and Molly had to jump to keep them from getting on her. It made me mad. "Good way to catch the house on fire," I said. "Let me do it for you, Mr. Taylor." "Hell no," he said. He sat the glass down on one side of the chair and drank out of the bottle. I never did see him drink out of the glass again. "All right," I said. I didn't want no argument with him. "It's dangerous, though." "Dangerous, my ass," he said, grinning at Molly like he was fixing to tell her some big joke. "This here's my house anyway. If I want to burn it down, then by God, I'll burn it down. Never asked you nohow. Get on out of here and go home. Who asked you over here in the first place?" "He's just visiting a little," Molly said. "He ain't doing any harm, Daddy." She said it kind of timidly. He gave her a hard look. "I never asked you to take up for him," he said. "A little licking wouldn't hurt you, sister. You ain't fixed my supper, so what are you sitting here for?" She looked hurt and sad. I think she was really scared to death of him and didn't know it herself. She picked up the popcorn bowl and went to the kitchen without saying another thing. I stood up and put on my coat and went over to the fire to warm my hands a minute. "Get away from there," he said. "Don't stand between me and the fire. Don't you know better than that? A little licking wouldn't hurt you none either, you damn coyote roper." I didn't see why I needed to take any more off an old surly bastard like him. "You ain't gonna lick me," I said. "You're too drunk." He grinned, but it was a pretty mean grin. "And quit trying to court my girl," he said. "I'd chop her in two with an axe before I'd let a feller like you have her." "You're so damn tough my teeth chatter," I said. "I'm a good notion to stuff you up this fireplace right now." That was the first time in my life I ever said anything bad to a person older than I was. It scared me a little, but the old man just took another drink. "You're a little pissant," he said. After that he just stared at the fire, and I left him to his bottle. Molly was in the kitchen crying and stirring stuff on the stove. "Don't argue with Daddy again," she said. "Please don't, Gid. I won't like you any more if you do." I went up behind her and hugged her. "Yes, you will," I said. "I sure hate to go off and leave you tonight. You know that, don't you?" She turned loose of the frying pan a minute and turned around and kissed me, but we were both uneasy because the old man was so close by. "You're my girl," I said. "You're the only one I'm ever going to have." I let her go then and started to leave, but she shoved the frying pan off the fire right quick and went out the back door with me into the cold. And she still didn't have no more clothes on than she had that morning. "I'll go help you get your horse," she said. "Dad's done forgot about supper, and he won't think of it till I remind him." I hugged her up against me as close as I could. "What made him so mad?" I said. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "Hush," she said. "Don't talk about Dad. I don't want you putting the blame on him." I shut up, but it seemed an awful way for a girl's daddy to act. "I don't think he'll lick me tonight," she said. "He was just talking." Molly was funny. She didn't seem to realize there was much wrong with him licking her. The wind was singing down off the plains, cold as ice, and by the time we got to the barn, Molly was about froze. I made her take my sheepskin while I caught the horse and saddled him. We lit the barn lantern, and she held it so I could see what I was doing. Even so, the barn was mostly shadows, and the horse didn't like it. When I got through, I set the lantern down and rubbed her hands to get them warm. "You'll probably take pneumonia," I said. "You ain't got many brains to be so sweet." She put her cold hands on my neck. "I just came out so you could kiss me good night," she said. "It ain't much fun in the kitchen when somebody else is around." I did, and it was funny. She was so cold on the outside and so warm underneath it all. Molly was always the warmest girl I knew. I blew out the lantern and led her and the horse out into the cold. I put her in the saddle in front of me where I could hold her. The moon was up, and the little thin cold clouds were whipping across it, going south. "I'd hate to be the moon," she said. At the yard gate I got down and helped her off. But I held her up against the horse for a minute, so he could warm her on one side and me on the other. "Come on to the dance with me," I said. "If Eddie bothers you about it, I'll stop him." She kissed me for a long time then and kept changing from one foot to the other. I guess they were about to freeze. Then she pulled back and looked at me. "You ain't the only kind of good person," she said. "How do you know you're any better than him?" "The same way you know what," I said. "Only you won't admit it. Come on and go with me." "I can't, honey," she said. "I done promised. But I'm so glad you come over. Come back and see me a lot, Gid." "You'll see a world of me before it's over," I said. "That's a promise I can make." She held my hand even after I was on the horse. Then we remembered she had on my jacket, and she took it off and gave it to me. "Now get on in before you freeze," I said. "I'll see you pretty soon." "I wish you could stay," she said. "I hate to see you go off. You're liable to freeze." But she's the one who would have frozen if I hadn't turned and ridden off. I don't think she wanted to go back in very bad. I know I sure did hate to leave. I rode off about 20 steps and stopped to button my coat. "Don't get lost," Molly said. "Go in, honey," I said. "It's awful cold." I guess she just grinned, I don't know. The last time I looked, she was still standing there by the fence, with the wind blowing around her. Chapter 11. Johnny and me talked it over and decided we would go to the dance anyway and not take no girls. Neither one of us wanted to take anybody but Molly. Course, I might take Mabel home, Johnny said, if she comes, but I ain't going to take her both ways. She won't go home with you, I said. Mabel's got more pride than that. Neither of us could understand why Molly would make a promise like that to a no-count like Eddie, but we knew it had to be stopped. I think we better whip him, Johnny said. You and me can fight over her in our own good time. No, we better not fight him, I said. That would just make her feel sorry for him. I guess that's why she goes with him anyway. I'll just tell him to stay away from her. He won't pay a damn bit of attention to you, he said. Hell, I don't pay much attention to you myself. At least it was a pretty night for a Christmas dance and not too cold. When we crossed Onion Creek, we both got the real dancing spirit, and we loped the rest of the way into town. But we sure weren't the first ones there. Half the horses and buggies in the country were hitched outside the dance hall, and there were even quite a few automobiles. I wanted an automobile myself, but Dad was too tight to buy one. Johnny said he wouldn't have one of the things. We came in right in the middle of a square dance and didn't have any way to get in on it, so we stood around patting our feet. The hall was nearly full, and the people were stomping and drinking a lot of eggnog and having a real good time. There they are, I said. Molly was dancing in a set just across the floor from us. Her black hair was flying around her shoulders, and she looked her rosiest. Eddie had on his roughnecking boots, so you could hear him all over the hall when his feet hit the floor. He wasn't dressed up or nothing, and he looked like he was already drunk. It made me so damn jealous I could hardly stand still. Once when him and Molly met to do-si-do, he swung down and kissed her big before he went to the next girl. She never seemed to mind. I guess she was having such a big time being away from home that she forgot herself. Why do you reckon all these old folks want to get out there and dance, Johnny said. It's just making a spectacle of themselves, if you ask me. I thought so, too. The whole town was there. All the little kids were running around screaming and chasing one another and talking about what they were going to get for Christmas. Their mamas and papas weren't paying any attention to them at all. Everybody that could move danced. Fat ones and skinny ones and ugly ones and pretty ones. Of course, there were a few bachelors off in the refreshment room emptying the eggnog bowl and talking about the war. But there wasn't over a dozen of them. I even seen a preacher dance one set, and that was a pretty rare sight. I think I'll partake of a little eggnog, Johnny said. Then we'll see what we can do about Molly. I let him go. I didn't intend to drink much myself till after the dancing was over. I had a hard enough time dancing as it was. When the set was over, I started across to Molly, but it was crowded on the floor, and of course about 50 people stopped me to shake hands and ask how I was and wish me Merry Christmas and ask how Dad was and how the cattle were and all that, so that they started a round dance before I could get over to her. And Eddie hugged her up and was dancing with her. It made me so mad I could have bitten myself. I didn't see how she could breathe, he was holding her so tight. I was right on the spot when that dance was over, though. Johnny was across the hall talking to Mabel and some feller she was with. Eddie was grinning and red in the face, and his cowlick was falling down in his eyes. He was in an awful good humor. "Howdy, cowpuncher," he said. "Dance with my girl a while. I gotta have me a drink. This dance hall is hot." He handed me Molly's hand and went outside. I guess he had him a bottle somewhere. "Merry Christmas, Gid," Molly said. "I'm glad you all finally got here. Guess what? Eddie's bought him a car." I never asked her the story on it. It made me blue enough just to hear it. It was just the kind of thing that crazy bastard would do. He never owned a shirt in his life that didn't have 15 patches on it, neither. We found out later he got the car second-hand for $45. I guess he made the money roughnecking. The next one was a round dance, too, and we danced real slow. Molly had on a dark blue dress, and she had little tiny shadows under her eyes, like she hadn't been getting enough sleep. Her neck smelled like lavender, but her breath smelled a little like whiskey. I guess Eddie got her to take a drink. I wanted to say a lot of things to her, but she laid her head on my shoulder, and we didn't talk. Then I let Johnny dance one with her. I told him it was his Christmas present. I danced one with Mabel. She talked a blue streak. After that, I got to dance a good square dance with Molly, and that was fun. Eddie come in the middle of it, but he had to sit down and wait. I figured I would give up on it for the night and get drunk myself. As I was leading Molly off the floor, I told her I had her a Christmas present. "Let me come over and get it," she said. "Dad hasn't been in too good a mood lately." Eddie grabbed her and hugged her. He was about 5 degrees drunker than he had been. Johnny was getting drunk, too. He spent most of his time with Mabel. "Old Josh is going to take her home," he said. "I asked, but she said I could come by later, and she'd make me some hot chocolate. You know how I am about hot chocolate." I went in and took after the eggnog pretty heavy. I liked to sit and listen to fiddle music, so I sat down by the refreshments table and listened to Sally Gooden and Four Little Ladies and the Texas Star and all the others. Then all of a sudden Molly run in and squatted down by me and whispered in my ear. I seen she was crying. "Go stop them, Gid," she said. "It's such a nice dance. I don't want them to fight. Eddie gets so mean. Tell Johnny I won't never like him again if he fights." "What happened?" I said. "I've been drinking too much. Where'd they go?" "Outside," she said. "Go stop them, Gid." Most of the people still seemed to be dancing and having a good time. Usually when there was a fight, a lot of the men would go out and watch. "They went off behind the cars," she said. When I stood up, I didn't feel so drunk. "I doubt if I can stop them," I said, "but I'll try." The cold air felt real good after the dance hall, and my head felt clearer. Sure enough, they were over behind the cars. I guess they had already fought a little because Johnny had a nosebleed. It didn't mean much. I think his nose bleeds just from excitement. 6 or 8 of the bachelors were standing around watching. They had turned some car lights on so everybody could see better. Eddie had one fist doubled up and his arm drawn back, and Johnny was just standing there watching him. He had his thumbs hooked in his pockets. Johnny was drunk as a bat. They both were. "You're a damn oil field hound-running coward," Johnny said. Johnny looked happy about it all. He never minded fighting. But Eddie was serious about it. He kept his fist doubled up. Eddie was a coward. That's why I wouldn't have wanted to fight him. Somebody that's scared of you can really be dangerous. Johnny never noticed things like that. I started to say something to Johnny, but decided not to. They were going to fight anyway. Eddie kept standing there, holding back his fist and sneering that mean sneer of his, and all of a sudden Johnny made a run at him, and they went to the ground. Johnny was a quick bastard when he started. They went to rolling and bumping on the ground, each one trying to get a chokehold, and neither one doing the other much damage. "Hell, them boys ain't fighting," a man said. "They're just wallowing on the ground. Get up from there and fight, boys, if you're going to fight." They did, and that was Johnny's mistake. Eddie got him off balance and knocked him down and went to pounding on him. Then Johnny nearly got up again, and Eddie jumped on him and began to pound him against an automobile. "Now that's fighting," the feller said. I was getting nervous. It looked like we were going to be disgraced. Johnny couldn't get his balance, and Eddie kept pouring it on. Finally, he got Johnny down again, only he didn't go down with him. He stood back with his fist doubled up. I guess he thought he had won, because he kind of laughed. "You goddamn cowpunchers, you can't fight," he said. "Hell, it takes a roughneck to fight." And that was Eddie's mistake, thinking Johnny McLeod would quit fighting just because he was beat on a little. I knew damn well Johnny wasn't done with the fight because his eyes were open. Johnny never quit nothing while he still had his eyes open. I guess he was resting. Eddie sneered, and Johnny come up and stayed up. Eddie tried to kick him back down, but Johnny got the leg and set Eddie down himself. And while he had his leg, he managed to yank off one of the roughnecking boots, and he threw it out into the darkness as far as he could throw. Then he run Eddie against an automobile. They were out of the light then. I don't know exactly what happened. Somehow Johnny got Eddie up on the hood of a car and shoved him clear off on the other side. He ran around the car right quick, and we did too, but the show was over. Eddie was holding his neck and spitting, and wouldn't get up or say anything. I think he had bitten his tongue when he hit. Besides, the sheriff came about that time. "These boys ain't hurting one another, are they?" he said. "No, they're just fighting, Gus," a feller said. "I guess they're about done." Eddie stood up, but him and Johnny were both too tired to say much. I motioned at Johnny to keep quiet, but he didn't see me. The sheriff didn't mind fighting, but he couldn't stand nasty talking. "So you leave her alone," Johnny said. "You horse's butt, you." Eddie walked off to look for his shoe, and the sheriff turned around and took hold of Johnny's arm. "I don't like that filthy language," the sheriff said. "Who started this fight anyway?" "I did, by God," Johnny said, "and by God I finished it, too. And I'd whip you, too, if you didn't have that damn badge on." That was just the kind of crazy thing Johnny would say. The sheriff started off with him. "Taking the Lord's name in vain is one thing I won't stand for," he said. "Not even at Christmas time. What if a lady had heard you say that?" And off they went. "Don't think that Gus won't arrest them," the feller said. "He won't stand for no goddamn cussing, and I don't blame him." "No, but you know something," another feller said. "He'll never get elected in this damn county again. That's just how goddamn sorry people are getting." I danced a round dance with Molly and told her it was okay. "They wasn't neither one hurt," I said. "Eddie will be back when he finds his shoe. I guess I better take Johnny's horse up to the jail and see if I can talk the sheriff into letting him out." Molly felt a little better when she was satisfied there was nobody killed. "I wish I could take you home," I said, "even if he has got an automobile." "That makes me mad the way you talk about Eddie," she said. "Working in the oil field ain't no crime, is it?" "No, and you're too sweet to argue with." We walked off the floor, and I got my coat. "I hope they let Johnny go," she said. "Tell him to come and see me when he can. I'm sorry he got in trouble on my account." She wouldn't go outside with me even for a minute, afraid she would bump into Eddie, I guess. But I made her promise to come over and help us with the hog killing the next week. I figured I could give her her Christmas present then. I sure did hate to leave her at that dance. The sheriff, of course, wouldn't let Johnny go. I guess Johnny cussed him all the way to the jail. He was a funny sheriff. He never got mad, and he never got tickled either. "That boy talks too nasty," he said. "I ain't going to have that nasty talk around where there's ladies. Why, that would be a disgrace to the county." "I know it," I said. I thought I'd better agree with him. "If you'll let me have him, I'll take him out of town quick so there won't be no danger." "No, I'll keep him tonight," he said. "Just put his horse in the barn. Be a good lesson to a boy like that. Besides, I want to give him a good talking to before I let him go, and he's done asleep." So I went on home, 18 miles by myself. Chapter 12. The Wednesday before Christmas, Dad decided it would be a good time to kill the hogs. We had 4 big shoats to butcher, more hog meat than me and Dad could have eaten in 2 years. Dad had done made arrangements to sell 3 of the carcasses, though. The fellers he sold them to came over to help us. Dad had gone over special and asked Molly to come cook for the crew, and Johnny was there, of course, mostly just getting in the way. When you took Johnny off of his horse, he was the worst hand in the world. Me and him did the actual killing, shooting, and sticking, while Dad and the other men built the fires and got the water ready. Dad, he wouldn't have wallowed around in the hog pen mud for half the pork in Texas. Johnny worked the gun, and I worked the butcher knife, and we laid them low. Then we got our horses and drug the carcasses up to the fire one at a time. Johnny bitched around so much while we were scraping the carcasses that Dad finally sent him off down in the river pasture to drive in a yearling he thought was getting sick. Actually, Dad must have liked Johnny. He let him get away with a damn sight more than I ever got away with. About 9:30, Molly come riding up. She had on her red mackinaw. Just seeing her made me feel so good I could have jumped 6 feet. I never realized how lonesome I stayed till I got close to Molly. Not even then. When I realized it was when I had been close to her and one of us was leaving. Then for a day or two the world would look twice as bad as it really was. I took her down to the barn and put her horse where ours wouldn't kick hell out of him. I got her back in the hallway out of sight and gave her a kiss. "Silly," she said. "Who ever heard of kissing in the morning?" She wouldn't let me hold her hand when we got outside because she was afraid everybody would tease us. She was right. They would have. It was a good day. We got the hogs butchered without no trouble, and Molly cooked a big dinner, and everybody enjoyed it and complimented her on it, and that made her feel good. Johnny even made it back in time to eat. For once he showed pretty good manners. In the afternoon we made soap and cracklins, and the other fellers loaded their pork and went home. It was nearly supper time before we got all the kettles cleaned, so Molly decided to stay and fix supper, too. Johnny went on home. Dad gave him a quarter of pork for a Christmas bonus, and he told us all Merry Christmas and went off with it tied to his saddle. Watching him leave made me blue for a minute. It was strange. I knew right then he'd never get Molly to marry him. Only for a minute I wished he could have. It would have been nice for him if he could have. "Well, we done a good day's work," Dad said. "Let's go inside where it's warm. I could stand some supper." We went in, and the kitchen was nice and warm. The lamps were lit. Me and Dad sat at the table and watched Molly working around the sink and around the stove, not paying us much mind. It was a treat for us just to watch. Me and Dad had batched for 9 years, and we thought we got along pretty well. But having Molly in the kitchen eating supper made the way we usually done it seem pretty flat and dull. The house was just so much fuller with her in it. I guess Dad felt it too. "Sure do appreciate your coming over to cook," he said. "This here'll beat Christmas." Molly turned and looked at him a minute. She had a pan of biscuits in one hand and a gravy bowl in the other, and I don't think she even heard him. She just smiled and went on cooking, and Dad never repeated it. He was looking too tired, Dad was. He hadn't been feeling too good, I didn't think. Of course, he never said a word about it. Molly fed us beef and beans and biscuits and gravy and pie, and we ate plenty of it. I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I couldn't keep from wishing I could get her to marry me. Then we could have her around all the time. She sat down at the other end of the table and drank her coffee, not saying anything, but perfectly content. We were all quiet, but it was real easy quiet. Finally, Dad got up and said he had to go to bed. He offered to pay Molly something, but of course she wouldn't take nothing. So he gave her a quarter of pork and some cracklins and told me to ride home with her to see that she got there all right. Then it was just me and her in the kitchen. "Let's go over to my house, Gid," she said. "Dad's gone to Wichita. You and him won't bother one another tonight." "Okay," I said. When we got there, we built up the fire in the fireplace and sat in front of it a long time. I gave Molly her Christmas present, but I wouldn't let her open it. And we sat there not talking much or kissing much or anything, just resting together. Then she leaned forward and took some pins loose and shook down her long hair and lay back against me, so the firelight shone on her face and eyes and mouth. I was half sick, I loved her so much and was so excited by her. In a minute I was all wrapped around her. She wanted to go in the bedroom and pulled her shirt tail out as we went down the hall. It was cold as ice until we had been under the covers for a while, and then it got toasty warm and only Molly's fingers were cold. And there wasn't no old man to worry about, so we could go ahead, only I was so excited about her I didn't do no good. I don't guess I knew enough about what I was doing. "Oh, hell," I said. "Damn it, I wouldn't blame you for marrying somebody else." "Be still and hush," she said, and kissed me. "I don't see why you put up with me," I said. "You're my favorite," she said. "You ain't done nothing wrong. You just enjoy me a whole lot, I can tell that. And that's what I want you to do. Go to sleep, sugar." And I did. It was the best sleeping in the world. When I woke up, I could hardly believe I'd slept so good. Molly was still asleep, and I was holding her. It was pure enjoyment. Finally, I woke her up, because having her asleep made me feel lonesome. We hugged and talked a while, but she wouldn't say she'd marry me. "That would be wrong," she said. "I don't love you that way." And then she leaned over and looked me right in the face with her hair touching my chest. "But you love me that way, don't you?" she said, as if she had never thought of it before. "You do love me that way, Gid," she said. "That's going to be so sad. I don't love anybody that way." And she lay with her face tucked into my neck a long time, so I could feel her breath on my Adam's apple. About daybreak, we got up and had a real good breakfast and were cheerful as we'd ever been. I went home and worked and was all right that day. But the next day when I woke up, I was so lonesome for her, I was sick. All I could see that day was her face leaning over me and her hair. Chapter 13. It didn't seem like I was going to be able to stand not having Molly around more of the time. Every time I thought about her, I got bluer and bluer. And if that wasn't trouble enough, Dad had me farming. It was a warm January and looked like it was going to be warm all winter. Johnny was doing most of the cow work, and Dad was just mostly piddling around. He still wasn't feeling good. So for 4 days in a row, I had to go down and follow them worthless mules around that worthless field, thinking about Molly all the time and wondering when I'd get to see her. Then one Monday, about the middle of the morning, Johnny come through the field on his way to the league pasture. He was jogging along, looking pretty discouraged, and I waved at him to come over. I was tired of kicking clods around anyway, and he got off his horse and we sat by the plow a while. "Don't you get tired of this?" he said. "No, I love it," I said. "I'd like to do this for the rest of my life. What are you so down in the dumps about?" "Oh, Molly, I guess. I wish I wasn't so damn sweet on her. Hell, I oughtn't to be. She don't care nothing about me. At least not like I want her to. She just ain't got no sense." "She's got the wrong kind of sense," I said. "Anyhow, what's she done now?" "Nothing she hasn't done before," he said, looking real sour. "I rode all the way over there to visit her last night, and the first thing I saw was Eddie's damn automobile. I never even went in. See him?" I looked through the kitchen window. He was sitting there eating vinegar cobbler, and she was waiting on him just like he owned the place. That made me plain sick. We sat there for about 10 minutes, neither one of us saying a word. I couldn't think of one hopeful thing. "Shit on the world," I said. "Let's go someplace. I'll be damned if I'll plow my legs off while she cooks cobbler for somebody like Eddie. Let's just go to the Panhandle and show them all." "All right," he said. "You gonna leave the plow here?" I did. I rode in on one mule and unharnessed. Dad was up at the house sitting by the fireplace trying to shave a corn off his toe. He looked pretty tired, but I wasn't in no mood to sympathize. "Dad," I said, "things are just going wrong. I've had enough of this country. Me and Johnny are going up on the plains for a little while. I hope you can hire you a little help." "Going, are you?" he said. "That oil fielder running you off?" "Not by a damn sight," I said. "I'm sorry to leave you." "Oh, I guess I can do the work," he said. "I always have." I seen he wasn't going to act nice, so I didn't say any more to him. "Let me hear from you now and then," was the last thing he said. So we rode to Henrietta that night and arranged with an old boy to take the horses back to Archer County for us. We got good and drunk, and along about midnight we caught the train north. Our spirits weren't too good, but we were the only passengers, and we each got a bench and went to sleep. I dreamed that Dad was out terracing in the moonlight. When I woke up, Johnny was still asleep, and I had a headache, so I went out on the porch of the caboose. I guess we were about to Childress then. Anyhow, we were on the plains. The cold air kind of cleared my head. It was exciting to see all that country stretched out around me, but I felt pretty sad, too. I was split. I was glad to be where I was, and yet I wanted to be where I had just left. Looking down the rails, I couldn't help but think of the people at home, Dad and Molly mostly. Thinking about them, I got lonesome and went in and woke Johnny up. We stayed awake the rest of the night, talking about all the different big outfits we could work for.